I am one of those people. One of those people who likes something and it becomes my entire personality. The first time I watched Blade Runner, I must have been a teenager. I've always liked science fiction generally for as long as I can remember, and to be honest, I don't know why Blade Runner especially sticks in my mind. Granted, it's a beautiful movie with an understated, powerful story, a world bursting with imagination and wonder, etc. I could put these down to the reason why I love it so much. But you know what? The movie looks beautiful and has a certain aesthetic. The truth is, I don't really know, but what I do know is I love anything that looks like Blade Runner, I love anything that sounds like Blade Runner, and I love anything that feels like Blade Runner, which is kind of the crux of this whole video. I'm not alone on this. If you look around online, you will see that this bug has burrowed into the minds of many other people. Like many niche interests, when we see something that emulates it, we have to point it out, and we have a connection with people who have similar interests to us. Now consider, as someone who likes video games, who also enjoys making videos, who also enjoys excuses to deep dive into Blade Runner, this video is the next logical step. A video series, where I talk about video games that have similar worlds and themes to the Blade Runner universe. I will give some quick caveats before I start. No official or unofficial Blade Runner games will be added to the list. Given that there are so many games and there are more being made all the time, it is possible that I will miss some games or just not consider them noteworthy to what qualifies a game as Blade Runner-like, and I feel as though a dystopian future setting is pretty much a given, exploring the themes of humanity and artificial intelligence, what makes us human, etc, etc. Visuals are another point. You have the rain, the nice coats, the broodiness, the megastructures, giant commercials that beam into your eyes no matter where you are, and of course, a hard-boiled noir detective element. The first game on the list is Cyberpunk 2077. I thought I'd get this one out of the way, as this game is such an obvious love letter to Blade Runner. This game will probably be the highest profile one on the list, but we have a futurist dystopia dominated by large corporations, set in California. I really don't know where to begin with this one, because despite being based on a board game, it is so obviously inspired by Blade Runner, which a lot of science fiction is, to be fair. But if someone told you that these two were set in the same universe as each other, you probably wouldn't even question it. Now, I have played this game quite extensively. I think I'm about 130 hours in, and despite the high profile issues it's had on release, I have to say I absolutely loved it. In fact, I do want to do a completely separate video one day where I just talk about how much I love this game. Now, to be fair, would I have loved this game if it wasn't the closest thing we've had to an open world Blade Runner game? If I'm being really honest, probably not. This is where I refer you to the beginning of the video and loving anything vaguely Blade Runner. But I won't lie to you, it's not the best game I've ever played. It doesn't have the best story, it doesn't have the best gameplay. But from a personal experience, running around in Night City was just such a joy for me. Whether it's the streets in glaring sunlight, or the rain-soaked roads, or seeing the hive of neon lights from the cold desert, the ambient noises all around you, speakers, billboards, hover ships, the vast overpopulated synthetic city surrounded by a dead, barren natural world. I feel like I can't really do justice to how much I love this game for its setting. I feel like it really does just feel like an extension to the Blade Runner universe. And as a game that I've finished, I can talk about the ending, so there will be spoilers here. I think there are some parallels that can be drawn between V and Roy Batty's stories. They're both very aware of their approaching death, and they raise hell trying to prevent it. It did definitely make me feel things, quite strong things actually. It affected me in a way emotionally that I didn't really expect it to. And regardless of whether you think the game was great, mediocre, or terrible, I can only really judge it on those things subjectively. There are so many things I could say to compare these two. I'm sure lots of people already have, and it's probably a whole new series in of itself. But to summarise, big Blade Runner feels a fat Vangelis synth note right up inside your... If Cyberpunk was the most obvious choice, this is probably a close second behind it. It's the Deus Ex series. Deus Ex contains 6 games, the first of those being released in the year 2000, and the latest of the main series coming in 2016 with Mankind Divided. The game is set in, you guessed it, a dystopian future where corporations run rampant and technology is entrenched in our lives. While this is another game clearly inspired by Blade Runner, Deus Ex has a bit more in common with Cyberpunk 2077 in that it deals with the idea of humans and augments and the many dangers and benefits that may come with this. Playing as JC Denton in the first game, and in later games in Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, you take control of Adam Jensen, who is probably the most perfect example of a cyberpunk archetype there is. A brooding, hard-boiled, cool coat-wearing cyberpunk protagonist. A former cop who now spends his time solving crimes and gutting people with his mental wrist swords. Of course, Blade Runner and Deus Ex aren't exactly the same. They're both playing the same game, just at two different ends of the plate. I don't know what that means, but I think you get the idea. Whereas Blade Runner deals with unchecked technological advancements in the form of creating living sentient beings and all of the ethics relating to that, Deus Ex's transhumanism examines at what point humans stop being human and become something else entirely. The whole question of, should we, just because we can? I have played a few of the Deus Ex games and I do love the world that they convey. The dystopian nature of it is similar to that of Blade Runner, but it's unique enough to have its own identity and look. I would certainly recommend Human Revolution as it's the one I've played most, and it should definitely hit the spot if you're looking for that Blade Runner hit.
The year is 2084. If they told me what the world will become, I would not have believed them. My name is Daniel Lozalski. I'm an observer.
We have a curious and intriguing indie game by the name of Observer. This game sees you take first-person control of an old grizzled detective. The year is 2084 and you're searching for your son in the Polish city of Krakow. Now, straight away the vibe of this is very standard cyberpunk. You've got the rain, the night, the technology, but there is one particular thing about this game. Get this, you are voiced by and essentially play as Rutger Hauer, Roy Batty himself, so we can crank that Blade Runner meter up to 11. You play as part of a special police unit called Observers, and you're equipped with an augment that allows you to scan for evidence nearby, which is always convenient for a video game detective. Now the entire game takes place in the vicinity of an apartment block. Your character becomes locked inside and is essentially trying to solve the mystery of what happened to his son. You'll talk to several people, question them, and the character you play as Daniel Lozarski. Your augment also allows you to view other people's memories and experiences, and in terms of gameplay this is much more along the lines of a psychological horror. I actually haven't played this one, but when you think about it, some of the potential horrors that we're faced with in these cyberpunk worlds certainly make for great horror themes, and when you consider the developers are the same people who made Layers of Fear, Blair Witch, The Medium, they clearly have a love of the horror genre. I did consider playing this one at some point because of the setting, but I'm not a fan of first-person horror games or stealth horror games where you have to run away from things and hide from things. There are a few segments where you have to run away from this 7-foot monster with tubes coming out of his face and he wants to eat you alive, and you have to hide under a desk to get away from him. Just reminds me too much of my dad. But from what I've seen, this game has a really deep lore and backstory. You've got nanophages, digital plagues, wars, drug use, the government hacking people's minds. I don't know if they plan on making any future games in this series, given that it seems to be quite a niche game, and compared to their other games it's not their most popular. But I'm sure there are more stories to be told in this world. But having not actually played this game, obviously I can't personally recommend if you play it or not. But if you like Blade Runner and psychological horror, it seems like a pretty perfect combo. I mean, you play as Rutger Hauer for God's sake. For our next game we're going all the way back to 1988. Long before any of those other games were inspired by Blade Runner, there was a game developer who would later become known for his love of classic American movies. A Japanese fella by the name of Hideo Kojima. The game Snatcher was Kojima's cyberpunk adventure. Imagine the love child of Terminator and Blade Runner gestated inside Kojima's, what are those things called in his game? I don't know. But basically he decided he liked both movies and decided to make a game based on it. It takes place in a futuristic city somewhere in Asia. Somewhere, it's not that big of a place. The only info I could find, it literally says an artificial island somewhere in East Asia. The story is that humanoid robots, referred to as Snatchers, are killing humans and replacing them unbeknownst to anyone else. You play as a character who is part of an agency who hunts them down. I don't think it goes as far as calling them Blade Runners, but the aesthetic of the character is clearly derived from a noir detective a la Rhett Deckard. The Snatchers are more inspired by Terminators. I mean, both movies came out within a few years of each other. The gameplay was a weird mix of menu-based systems, investigating clues, talking to people, also some very rudimentary shooting sequences. This game got generally good reviews, while it was not a hit commercially, and as for Hideo Kojima's game development career, no one really knows what happened to him. But seriously, aside from being a clear, direct inspiration from the movie, this game genuinely seems like it was ahead of its time. A cinematic, gritty, adult-themed, story-heavy game. I haven't played this one, it came out before I was born, and I can imagine it being a real pain in the arse to get a hold of. But if you're a die-hard Kojima fan, I'm sure it's worth giving it a go for the sake of history, because this seems like an interesting game that's been kind of forgotten about in the annals of time. I said annals, not anals. Gemini Rue, which I hope I'm saying correctly. Released in 2011, presented in a retro pixel art style, you control two characters in the game. Initially as Azrael Odin, a very cool cyberpunk name, who is a law enforcer searching for his brother. Set in the 23rd century, you start on the rainy, crime-ridden planet called Baracus. This does invoke the point-and-click Blade Runner game of 1997. It definitely has that feeling, just in the way it's presented. And this game, as well as the previous game, are good examples that I never even knew existed until I started researching for this video. So that's the added bonus of making these. The game received good reviews and even won a few awards. Having not played it, I've read some stuff about it. The story isn't too long, so I don't want to give too much away, but it most definitely seems to fill the Blade Runner-like category. And it has that really intriguing, smaller studio kind of vibe to it. And it's still available, so if you want to check it out. The studio is called Wadjet Eye Games. Again, no idea if I'm saying that right. Wadjet. I don't believe I've heard of them before, but apparently they've been consistently putting out games almost every year since 2006. So that is pretty impressive. System Shock. This one is relevant for a couple of reasons. One, it was recently remade, hello algorithm, and two, it deals with issues of artificial intelligence, an issue that's become very quickly actualized in the past few years. Artificial intelligence has just exploded almost from nothing, it feels like. System Shock features a dystopian world set in the year 2072. The Trioptimum Corporation holds control of Citadel Station, and Edward Diego, a corrupt executive, enlists the help of you, a hacker, who is in prison after trying to hack the station. He offers you a grubby deal, the eradication of your criminal record, and installing a military-grade neural implant if you agree to hack the station's AI, and then remove the AI's ethical restraints, so that he may continue doing illegal experiments. Your character accepts the deal, gets the job done, and you can probably guess the rest. The game's world has the high-tech, low-life vibe. It has the corporate corruption, artificial intelligence turning on its creator. Visually, it certainly matches what we all loosely agree to be the Blade Runner look. Despite all this stuff, it is a bit monstery and horror-y, so I was kind of on the fence as to whether it should be on this list or not. Going back to my point at the beginning, I feel like I don't want to overthink things too much, but ultimately I made the decision to include it. Honestly, that's about all I have for the Blade Runner similarities. Maybe if you're a fan of the franchise, or if you've played the game, you might be able to draw more accurate comparisons. The original game came out in 1997 and is considered to be one of the earliest examples of an immersive sim game, and the remake came out this year in 2023, so if you find it hard to play older games, you can play the newer one. The next entry is Anachronox. This is a game you'd be forgiven for having never heard of. I'd never heard of it before this. 1 year after the success of the original Deus Ex, Ironstorm released this PC-only third-person RPG action game, sporting polygonal graphics not dissimilar to Deus Ex, if slightly more uncanny. The game takes place on a planet called Anachronox, which is a planet inside a larger artificial spherical construction called the Sender One, which is said to have been created long ago by ancient aliens. Up to their old tricks again. You play as Sylvester Buccelli, known as Sly Boots, a grizzled private investigator who doesn't pay their bar tab. He wears a long coat and has a holographic assistant who is the digitized version of the woman he's in love with. The game itself is quite curious. You travel to various planets, have conversations with quirky people, including dialogue choices, and battle enemies using the turn-based system. Over the course of the game, you'll amass a ragtag group as you investigate a mystery with far-reaching implications on the entire universe. The game features futuristic cities, gritty environments, flying cars, noir elements, themes of dystopia and artificial intelligence. Now, of course, not hearing of this game before, I've never played it, but apparently the game ended on a major cliffhanger, which was to be used to feed into a sequel. But 22 years later, it's looking increasingly unlikely. Although in doing research for this, Square Enix stated that it would allow developers to pitch ideas for old eidos IPs, who Square Enix acquired back in 2009. One of the games listed specifically was Anachronox. However, in 2022, the Embracer Group purchased a number of Square Enix assets, which included eidos. You know what, I'll be honest with you, I'm reading this from a screen, I don't really know what's going on. This is the real Cyberpunk. All of this corporate bullshit. TLDR, there's probably never going to be a sequel to this game. The next entry may be controversial. It's the most popular game in this episode, and I'll try and make my point as best as I can. It's Detroit Become Human. Now, I anticipate there'll be two distinct responses to this. Maybe not, maybe I'm just imagining it. But this game, as well as all of the other Quantic Dreams games, seem to be so polarizing. There are people who love them, and there are people who think that they are atrocious. I have actually played this game as well as a few other Quantic Dreams games, so I feel as though I can speak on this a bit more personally, and I will be giving my opinions on the game, which might veer into personal indignation at some point, fair warning. So, Detroit Become Human, released in 2018 by French studio Quantic Dreams. It was the latest in their story-driven interactive QTE format, something which they became famous for, and something which splits people in of itself. The game is set in 2038, in the city of, take a guess. In a future where androids are widely commercially available, you take control of 3 of them throughout your time in the game. Marcus, Kara, and the most iconic and, in my opinion, best character, Connor. But before going into the game too far, I'd like to go over the history of Quantic Dreams. The games are almost more like interactive movies, something that the director, David Cage, doesn't shy away from. And on the subject of David Cage, he is a peculiar study of a human. I remember being in university in around 2010, my friend told me about this weird game called Fahrenheit. An interactive game where you play as a man who, in my own housemate's words, could play the guitar really well and end up having an interactive hookup with his ex. Play it so badly that he doesn't hook up with his ex and becomes so depressed that he jumps out of a window. I ended up checking out the game and yeah, that happens. I know that a lot of people have nostalgia for this game, but Fahrenheit, also known as Indigo Prophecy, was, well, do your own research.
I've seen you in my dreams. You have to come with me. We have to...
I know it might sound like I'm going off topic here, but I feel like this is relevant, not so much as a backstory to the developer, but more to the director. I've personally always found David Cage's games more funny, almost in a so bad they're good kind of way.
Fucking asshole!
But for the most part, enjoyable. And there tend to be themes that come up in every game: running from the police, underground resistance, romances. What I will say is that I think Detroit Become Human is probably their best game yet, in terms of the graphics and the lore. Just the way this game depicts the near future is, I think, really well done. The blend of old and newer society progresses is pretty much how I would imagine a transitional period of society going to a more technologically advanced age. Obviously, the game being about androids is a huge factor in the Blade Runner comparison. Connor, the android you play as, hunts down rogue, deviant androids.
28 stab wounds.
Question of whether these androids have a soul comes up. The main part of the story focuses on the androids being sentient and wanting to be treated as such, rather than just being indentured tools for humans. And that's one of the main questions connected to Blade Runner, which is why I felt this game had to be on this list. Just one last thing on David Cage. In the lead up to the game's release, he was interviewed and asked about the game's similarities to things like Blade Runner, to which he responded by saying he thinks his game is original because in his game, the point is to empathize with the androids. Silicon Dreams, Cyberpunk Interrogation. This is one of those games I found out about through doing research for this video. Silicon Dreams Cyberpunk Interrogation was released in 2021 and sees you play the role of an interrogation android, tasked with identifying rogue deviant androids via, you guessed it, interrogation. Cyberpunk ones, presumably. And funnily enough, I can't think of a more perfect game to combine with our last game, Detroit and Blade Runner. Here we have a game about an android hunting for deviant androids via a Voight-Kampff-like interrogation. The gameplay consists of asking androids questions, probing them and engaging them in a game of mental chess. You try to ascertain if they are who they say they are, or an android pretending to be human, an android pretending not to be a deviant, or even a human aiding an android. You can be honest, lie, be direct, play the long game, probe them for emotional responses, and at the end of your interview, you can choose, using the knowledge you've gained, to release the android, reprogram the android, or destroy the android. Keep in mind, being an android yourself, you'll be given a review score of how accurately you did each time. The better you do, the higher your ranking, the worse, the lower, and if it gets too low, you yourself will be destroyed. And if you're thinking about releasing any androids because you feel sorry for them, there is a secondary review system, and the android will probably get destroyed anyway. So the game actually forces you to be complicit, which makes for a really interesting dynamic. You kind of feel for some of these androids as you learn their story, so you don't really want to reprogram them and wipe their mind or send them to be destroyed. But of course you can't save them all, so I found myself deciding in my own head which ones kind of deserve to die more than others, which is delightfully messed up, which is of course the whole point of the game. Essentially, think of it as Blade Runner meets Papers, Please. Upon finding out about this game, I actually bought it and played it for a few hours. I spoke in the beginning of this video about being tentative and unsure when it comes to games being described as Blade Runner-like. I was wondering, am I being too picky, too strict? But then a game like this comes along which really captures the spirit of Blade Runner. A game like this is the exact game I had in mind when I begun this whole series. Beneath a Steel Sky. This one was quite a popular title that came up when talking about games like Blade Runner. I have an early memory of playing a game called Broken Sword on my first PC and later on my first laptop. I have a specific memory of sitting in my grandma's house playing Broken Sword for hours. An old school point and click game by Revolution Software, it kept me occupied in a time before smartphones and before readily available walkthroughs. This same developer would also be behind Beneath a Steel Sky, a game I unfortunately never got round to playing, but it would be their first cyberpunk science fiction entry into their game library. Released in 1994, the game was set in a dystopian future in an unspecified year. In the wastelands of Australia, your character, Robert Foster, survives a helicopter crash and is rescued and integrated by a local Aborigine tribe, who raise him as one of their own. Some years later, security forces capture Robert and take him to Union City, where he was originally from. Here you'll embark on a journey into your past. Making your way from the top of the city, you'll escape law enforcement by travelling further down. Just looking at the way the world is portrayed, you definitely get the Blade Runner vibes from it. You also get the usual laundry list from this Union City: oppression, corruption, wealth inequality, AI, megacities owned by corporations. Dave Gibbons, known for co-creating the Watchmen comic book series, worked as a background artist on this game, which explains the game's striking visuals and unique otherworldly presentation. The game boasts some very beautiful pixel art, ranging from comfy lived-in spaces, to functional industrial locations, to beautiful twisted high-rises, linked by an intertwining web of gangways. This game is viewed as a classic, one of the pioneers depicting a cyberpunk world in a video game, along with a complex story, a rich world aimed at an adult audience, but with the added twist of Revolution Software games, and their trademark wacky humour.
You've turned me into a vacuum cleaner. It's functional. Don't be ungrateful.
And if you've ever wanted to play this game, it was actually made completely free to download in 2003. The next game in today's list is Beyond a Steel Sky. A common thing I find myself repeating in this series is finding a game that I never even knew existed. And this isn't just older games. There are games made in the last few years that have seemingly just gone under the radar. I had heard of Beneath the Steel Sky many times before this, but I have never heard of its sequel, released 26 years after in 2020. But this was a thing. This game is set about 10 years after the original, and sees you reprising your role as Robert Foster, the same protagonist from the first game. What's immediately apparent about this game is that it swaps out the old point-and-click style gameplay and opts for a more modern third-person experience. It's now much more reminiscent of a Telltale Games title, with a colourful cel-shaded graphic style, in keeping with its comic roots. The game sees Robert return to Union City, which is now under new management, and now depicts more of a utopia rather than a dystopia. But you know the deal with that, it's two sides of the same coin. In something that sounds like it's straight out of a Black Mirror episode, the city now gives citizens a kudos score, which represents their societal standing and affects what they can and can't do. The city itself visually reflects this inverse change in society. Tall, slender buildings of all kinds of colours populate the landscape. Public transport pods zip you to your destination along tracks that weave in between structures and over lush greenery. The game will see you performing detective work, solving mysteries and puzzles. Despite the fact that this game is set in a utopian metropolis, I think that being related to the previous title, we can give this the seal, stamp, whatever I'm giving these things. The issue of whether Cyberpunk can be utopian is one conversation that's been had before, and it's one that will come up in more detail in the next episode. The next game on our list is Syndicate. The next couple of games on this list are also related. The first one we'll be talking about is Syndicate, released in 1993. This was an isometric real-time tactic game developed by Bullfrog Productions. Set in the year 2096, mega corporations have replaced governments, which by the way is something that's definitely going to happen if you believe almost any cyberpunk-themed plot. One of these corporations is Eurocorp, who have invented something known as the chip, a device in people's necks that can alter their reality. This all sounds perfectly fine so far. This corporation, as well as all the other major ones, have also been infiltrated by corrupt crime, Syndicate, and they would wage literal wars with one another over the manufacturing of these chip devices. This is because this technology can be used to control people, and according to the intro to the game, the very agents you control were once normal citizens, captured, corrupted, and cybernetically enhanced to be a corporate drone. This is something you can do to civilians later in the game also, so civilians can actually be brainwashed into fighting for these factions as cannon fodder. So you have these huge corporations being run by unethical crooks and sociopaths, who will stop at nothing to gain even the smallest advantage over their competitor, even if that means turning them into human paste so long as it serves their self-interests, and helps them in their effort to cannibalize the lives of the entire population, and give them no choice but to be beholden to them for the rest of their natural or unnatural lives. Anyway, back to the game. You take charge of one such corporation, and use your team of cyborg agents to complete missions and cause general havoc. Think of the game as a combination of the original Grand Theft Auto and Command & Conquer, and you'll probably have something that looks like this game. So you have corporations fighting wars against each other, using chips in civilians' heads, and making them collateral damage. Now that's pretty damn cyberpunk, especially when you consider its sequel, appropriately titled Syndicate Wars. The game was given a second installment in 1996 for the PC and 1997 for the PlayStation. Set 95 years after the first game, and the future is still pretty bleak. Eurocorp are more powerful than ever, but their existence is being threatened by a new virus that damages the chip device. Released by a religious group calling themselves the Church of New Epoch, this unsurprisingly leads to an almighty war, and the player is given quite the sandbox to experience this in. An open city with fully destructible buildings and more chaos and mayhem than ever. This certainly felt like the first game, but turned out to 11. Unfortunately, due to changing times and acquisitions, this would be the last time you saw an isometric RTS incarnation of this game. For now, anyway. There was originally a spin-off game in the works that would have been set on another planet, and it would have featured submarine gameplay and would have used the same technology as in the Syndicate games to control marine life. But we're getting pretty far away from Blade Runner here, and it was cancelled anyway. We now move on to Syndicate 2012. a reboot by Starbreeze Studios. It would take elements from the first game and transform them into a more modern FPS, suitable for the contemporary gaming space, along with graphics, cutscenes and voice acting. You take the role of a corporate hitman in the year 2069. The chip device has been given new life in this game, as well as once again being able to hack enemies' chip devices. In the same vein as other Cyberpunk titles such as Deus Ex and Cyberpunk 2077, you can also upgrade yourself by taking components from others, in a rather gruesome way similar to that of Altered Carbon, which by the way, if you haven't seen, that's another Blade Runner thing you have to see. I might do another series like this where I list TV shows and movies similar to Blade Runner, but that's a whole nother thing. So anyway, you take this Altered Carbon looking device, which looks like some kind of Apple Cora, and you jam it into their face to get their components out. Okay, wait. Okay, so apparently this game was written by Richard K. Morgan, the literal author of Altered Carbon. That makes a lot of sense. The game also has voice acting from Rosario Dawson and Brian Cox. How can this game have flown so far under the radar of this cast of people? The game's world, from what we saw, which was apparently frustratingly little of, definitely had the Blade Runner vibes, and in fact the movie is referenced as direct inspiration for the game. Different societal classes are represented in the game. The upper zone features a more utopian setting for those with the implants, and conversely in the down zone, you'll find the lower classes and non-implanted members of society. The game features some pretty gnarly, dark, violent stuff, moral grey areas, artificial memories, all in keeping with the cyberpunk theme. The game apparently only sold 150,000 copies worldwide, which, considering who was publishing the game, didn't go down too well. It seems as if this is a real shame considering the wealth of talent involved with this project. I'm sure there are still some people out there who will tell you that they've played this game and they thought it was great, but it definitely feels like there could have been more from this world. But who knows? Maybe there still can be. Just because something wasn't a commercial success doesn't mean great things still can't come from it. Or maybe Richard K. Morgan can make an Altered Carbon game. I'd be up for that. Sorry, that's probably slanderous in a Blade Runner video. Our next game on today's list was also released in the year 2012. There must have been something going on in that year. It was called Binary Domain. The first game developed by Ryoga Gotoku Studios. I definitely recorded that in one take. The same studio who would later go on to develop the highly acclaimed Yakuza series. This game takes place in a world ravaged by global warming. Sucks to be them, eh? Rising water levels leaving much of the planet uninhabitable. Much of the workforce is replaced by robots doing labour jobs, and there is an ongoing war between the two biggest corporate manufacturers of these robots. As part of the New Geneva Convention, there are international laws passed preventing the creation of what's known as hollow children, which are robots that can pass as human. This law appears to be broken when the headquarters for the American robots company, Bergen, is attacked by an individual who doesn't know they're a robot. This is a terrifying prospect, and is very much in keeping with Blade Runner. The idea that a replicant doesn't even know that they are a replicant. Your crew is then sent to Japan in order to bring the founder of Armada Corporation in for questioning. In terms of gameplay, this is a rather standard cover-based shooter, which sees you travelling around, exchanging fire with machines and they explode and break into pieces. Your crew is a diverse range of personalities with a colourful spectrum of personalities. I didn't proofread their script before I read it out. And these personalities are displayed in various cutscenes throughout the game.
What am I?
A hollow child. That's what we call you.
You've been programmed to think you're human, but you're not.
I don't want to die.
You won't. Only humans can die.
As far as the vibe goes, it's a pretty standard shoot the enemies kind of game, so I think beyond the initial theme of the story, that's kind of where the Blade Runner similarities end. I imagine this is what a Blade Runner movie would have been if it was directed by Michael Bay. The game didn't do particularly well, but developers behind the game have said they wanted to remaster or even make a sequel for the game one day, so who knows, maybe we'll find ourselves back here again. Mirror's Edge. In 2008, this game developed by DICE would become one of their most recognisable and iconic. Mirror's Edge is an action-adventure platforming game set in a futuristic utopian city, which sees you traversing the rooftops using parkour. This utopian society, of course, means it's simply a different form of dystopia. That's the way this perfect society is maintained through an oppressive regime. You play as what's known as a runner, someone who smuggles goods and information across the city. Going back to the beginning of the video and what I said about the Blade Runner aesthetics, this game is very much a stark contrast to that. Instead of rain-soaked nights with dirty streets, we find ourselves so high above the ground we can barely see it, and are bathed in sun and beautiful lighting. There is a distinct, clean, sanitized look to this game. Buildings appear sparkling white, and the atmosphere tinted with a blue hue from the daytime sky. This of course is a great analogy to utopias in general, a seemingly perfect, unblemished shell, hiding all of the ugly stuff underneath. So, given everything I've just said, this game isn't Cyberpunk, is it? Much less Blade Runner. While on the Cyberpunk front, I've heard the term solar punk being used on a few occasions, and while it does sound quite nice and sunny judging from the name, as far as I can tell, As far as I can tell, Solarpunk, despite its name, is not about it literally being sunny. It's more of an optimistic genre in general. So Mirror's Edge, with its story about an authoritarian government, corporate dominance, and strict surveillance on its inhabitants, I don't think would fit the description of Solarpunk. But dealing with the challenges that come with a more technologically advanced society, I think can be ruled as Cyberpunk, even if it's just bright, daytime, sunny Cyberpunk. And I suppose aesthetically, you could more closely compare this game to Blade Runner Black Lotus, which, despite being a show I haven't seen, is still technically Blade Runner. And from what I've seen, the main character Elle bears resemblance to the Mirror's Edge main character Faith, not just in the way they look, but they both employ a fighting style consisting of acrobatically chained together sequences using their agility. I did do some more research on cyberpunk subgenres, or just the punk subgenre in general, and other than steampunk, which I'm sure you've heard of, I found out that there are actually quite a lot of subgenres out there. Biopunk, nanopunk, clockpunk, dieselpunk, decopunk, atompunk, steelpunk, rockopunk, stonepunk, post-cyberpunk, raypunk, lunarpunk, nowpunk, that one's just made up. Well, all of these are, obviously. Elfpunk? What the fuck? Point being, there are many subgenres and derivatives of this genre, so I think we don't necessarily have to just stick to one that matches aesthetically, not even having the exact same state of the world. Technology being used to encroach on individual rights, escaping from the police. Maybe we could technically call this soft Blade Runner, Blade Walker, Blade Jogger. Okay, too far. Anyway, Mirror's Edge, it's like Blade Runner. The next game is one that has been on my list for the longest time. I actually purchased it on Steam a while ago and hadn't played it up until now, as is Adult Life. But before I recorded this episode, I knew I finally had to get started on it. So I did just that so I could provide a little more detail to this section. In 2015, Don't Nod Entertainment would release a game called Life is Strange, a supernatural teen drama. This, my friends, is the most perfect one-to-one likeness of Blade Runner ever depicted in a video game.
I think I'm in like a mellow Blade Runner mood. I always cry at the end.
Yes, the next game on this list is Life is... I'm only kidding, it's not Life is Strange.
Man, are you serial?
I'm actually going back to Don't Nod Entertainment's debut game, an action-adventure game set in Paris, now renamed Neo Paris, in the year 2084. I'm talking about Remember Me. In this world, brain implants are almost a universal thing among civilized citizens, with the corporation Memorize creating Sen-Sen, a technology that can store or even change other people's memories. You play as Nilin, a fugitive memory hunter and freedom fighter for the group known as the Errorists. The group, known for being extremists, were formed in order to take down Memorize, who are believed to be up to nefarious things with their access to people's literal memories and minds. Yeah, that'll happen. However, Nilin is special, as she has the ability to remix the memory of people who use this technology, effectively changing their memories. This leads to some really interesting and messed up scenarios where she manipulates people's memories to think that they have been the victim of horrific traumas in order to gain an advantage. This mechanic presents itself in the form of an interactive timeline you can scrub through and find moments or objects within the memory to isolate and change, leading to a different outcome. This element is somewhat reminiscent to Deckard's vocal Photoshop, or whatever it is he had from the movie. Yes, I'm aware it's called an Esper machine, which in itself I suppose was just a natural evolution considering he was a noir detective in a cyberpunk world, but more so the idea of manipulating someone's memories in order to alter them somehow is of course a core theme to Blade Runner. Not to mention the distinction between if these memories are artificial or not.
Implants. Those aren't your memories, they're somebody else's.
So on this alone, it makes a really intriguing Blade Runner-like story. But what about the setting? I find something so interesting about cyberpunk worlds that don't necessarily conform to the stereotypical setting. Now I love the foggy, rain-soaked streets as much as the next person, but I have often wondered what the world of Blade Runner would look like elsewhere in the world. What does London look like in this reality? Paris? Rome? Do they even exist in the same capacity? Do they bear the same resemblance to the towering skyscrapers, monolithic shapes, or mesmerizing tapestry of neon hues that we see in the urban metropolis of Los Angeles? Or perhaps the ochre-soaked fog and haunted statues of Las Vegas? With Neo Paris, where we find ourselves, we get an idea about one of these potential other locations. A multi-layered city, you find yourself right at the bottom, among the dirty sewers, with the mutated underclass of this reimagined Paris. I'm sure there's an optional controversial joke about French people in here somewhere, but forget it. The game itself isn't too remarkable, technically. It's very much a product of its time, from the 2010 era. This is showcased in the traversal and the combat system, which are somewhat simplified incarnations of Assassin's Creed and Arkham Asylum, respectively. But I think what really makes this game stand out, and the reason why it's on this list, is its world and concepts. Before I played this, I was considering its comparisons to Blade Runner. Was it justified? Is it a compelling argument to make? But, well, just look at this. The game even has its own soundtrack, and while it doesn't sound like the Blade Runner score, it has its own unique identity and sound in its own right, and that really speaks to the unique nature of the whole game. This next entry will cover a trilogy of games I have a rather peculiar interest in. It must have been back in around 2015, when one of my many YouTube channels was attempting to start up off the ground. It was an era of Happy Wheels, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Jacksepticeye, just a few of the things that come to my head when I think of that year. Our channel, which of course was a gaming channel, as one of the many on the platform at the time, was in the process of amassing its peak 124 subscriber viewer base. In doing research for games that we could potentially cover on the channel, I remember reading an article listing the best open world games ever made or something to that effect, and on that list was a rather obscure indie game by the name of The Longest Journey, a point-and-click adventure game released in 1999, which would go on to have a sequel named Dreamfall The Longest Journey, released in 2006, and a third called Dreamfall Chapters in 2014. This series of games, created by Ragnar Tornquist, was a series of games where the lore ran pretty damn deep, and I feel like I want to go into a bit more detail into these games and their settings, which are a unique blend of urban fantasy, sci-fi, alternate realities, and magic. The first game, The Longest Journey, set in the year 2209, sees you play as a character called April Ryan, a young art student living in a futuristic metropolis, but who has bizarre recurring dreams about a fantastical land. Can I sneak in a cheeky Blade Runner comparison here? Maybe not. So as always, some pretty obvious spoilers for the games I talk about, but you eventually find out that your world is one of two, yours being named Stark, with its advanced technology. The other world is called Arcadia, which is a place of mythology and magic. These two worlds exist independently until something happens and they start to drip into each other's realities. Upon finding a portal, April Ryan realizes that she's able to travel between both worlds, something not everyone can do. Who said that art degrees were a waste of money? Obviously, it's the modern day world of Stark that bears comparisons to the world of Blade Runner, where we have our old familiar bingo card. Mega corporations owning almost everything, including the police, flying cars, off-world colonies, neon signs, brutalist architecture. You begin the game in the city of Newport, and in a bohemian area called Venice. And to be honest, it seems not too dissimilar to a teen drama in the opening act. You have a best friend, a part-time job, and are struggling to juggle your social and academic life. As you begin to explore your surroundings, you can catch glimpses of this really beautiful world. The pixel art style renders a familiar but unique depiction of an alternate land. The world of Stark shows a rich, deep, and in my opinion, believable cyberpunk dystopia. It's one thing to only show the depravity, authoritarianism, and general misery of a world like this, but The Longest Journey adds an extra layer to this by showing us that there's a whole spectrum of places within the city. We get areas that are a quaint, pleasant bubble in an otherwise grim reality, and that grim reality is still there elsewhere. As you travel further into the city, you'll experience the hustle and bustle, grimy streets, neon lights, violent militias, and a sky covered in steel. In one scene, you see people queuing to sign up for jobs in the off-world colonies. This is a direct contrast to the upper parts of the city for the wealthy. This game, despite how original and strange it may be, does invoke Blade Runner. And this is without even getting into the fantasy side of the game, which boasts a whole host of wacky characters and truly bizarre concepts. But perhaps I'll leave those parts for you to discover yourself. And this is a theme that continues throughout the next two games. Its sequel, Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, has you playing as a new character, Zoe Castillo. Again, another young woman. This game once again switches between the high-tech world of Stark and the fantastical world of Arcadia. And once again, to keep this video focused on everything Blade Runner, and for the sake of my own brain, as this does get quite complex, I'll be sticking to the Stark side of the world. The game begins in the futuristic city of Casablanca, and you get a grandiose introduction to the seemingly utopian city. You then also get introduced to your AI companion, a small, talking purple gorilla. This one belongs in J.F. Sebastian's collection. Casablanca itself is an intriguing blend of traditional Moroccan architecture and futuristic technology. However, you still of course have the looming threat of authoritarian governments and a militant police force with no regard for your life. There is also a device that allows you to design your own lucid dream, which is run by a shady organisation who want to use it for nefarious means. I did actually start playing this game a few years ago, although I didn't complete it. In all honesty, I found it to be a bit awkward and clunky to play, but there's no doubt this is truly a unique world. The latest installment in the Dreamfall series is Dreamfall Chapters. Again split between the two worlds, Zoe finds herself back in the futuristic one of Stark. To be specific, the city of Europolis. From what I can gather from this game, this city is the main Blade Runner aspect to it. As always, I try to research the games as much as possible, but in all honesty, this game seems quite confusing and it goes a bit Matrixy. But from what I can gather, Europolis is the main hub, and the city you'll be spending most of your time in the modern world, with the rest of the game taking place in the fantastical world of Arcadia. Listed as a city in Stark, it actually stretches across Central Europe and encompasses France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic. A dystopian hellscape, a mammoth city stretching on farther than you can imagine. This is part of the what does Blade Runner look like in the rest of the world question I had earlier in the video, kind of being explored further. Chinatown Detective Agency. I think I probably stumbled upon this, and all the games on this list for that matter, when I was just browsing the Steam storefront, and I was probably drawn in by the aesthetics and the visuals. like the smooth brain that I am. The game looks cyberpunky, so me interested. That's pretty much what marketing does to our stupid human eyes. Chinatown Detective Agency, released in 2022, is an old school point and click game. The game is about, well, it's pretty bloody obvious if you read the title of the game like I just did. You take control of a detective in a futuristic Singapore in the year 2037. Now, I was going to play this game. I had it installed and loaded up, but when I tried to play it, it wasn't on Game Pass anymore. So off to a good start, but you play as Amira Dharma, beginning your new life as a private detective in the Chinatown area. And you'll travel the globe, interview people, chase criminals, solve puzzles, standard detective work. But what's unique about this game is that the solution to puzzles aren't just solved in-game. Some of them require general real-world knowledge in order for you to complete them, which means you'll have to do a bit of IRL detective work. The game will take you to numerous countries across the globe as you attempt to solve cases which are inevitably all linked to a deeper conspiracy theory. You can literally buy tickets and book specific flights in-game, and you'll be presented with all the futuristic cyberpunk good stuff that we're here for, all displayed in an eye-catching pixel art style, saturated in neon. You can visit cities such as Osaka, London, Istanbul, Athens, Kuala Lumpur, Cairo, New Delhi, Paris, Toronto, Mexico City, Dubai, Boston, Rio, San Francisco, Jerusalem, and more. That's not even all of them. You'll be able to read an alternate history of everything that's happened in this city up until the year 2037. And you'll be able to look over their skylines as they turn from day to night. I think these are a really nice depiction of near-future cities, where you can see cyberpunk elements growing out from their traditional base. The local area of Singapore contains a more intricate and detailed set of locations that can be reached by a subway. And again, these are some really beautifully rendered places that provide that Blade Runner feast for the eyes. I don't want to go too deep into the story because it's a shame that I haven't played it yet, but it's still on my list and I hope to play it one day. Our next game is Gamedec, a 2021 point-and-click game where you play as a Gamedec, a game detective, working your way through a plethora of virtual reality worlds, simulations where real people spend the majority of their life, attempting to escape them in some way. Set in Warsaw in the 23rd century, your customizable detective will be able to collect clues, make dialogue choices, and use skills that can be leveled up throughout the game to aid them along their way. The story will change based on the choices you make and the decisions you come to. The game is based on a collection of short stories released in 2004, written by Marcin Przybylak. This is one of quite a few of the games I've come across on my list with a Polish background, the others being Cyberpunk 2077 and Observer. I'm sure there are a whole range of historical reasons that people far more educated than myself will know, but it seems like Poland in particular produces some really good cyberpunk in general. The next game is so indie that I couldn't even find a Wikipedia page for it, or the developers. Released in 2021, Lacuna puts you in the shoes of a typically hard-boiled, cigarette-smoking noir detective in the city of Louisville on the planet of Gara, a star system colonized by humans. You'll investigate, collect clues, and pore over everything to make game-altering decisions, in a gritty cyberpunk world displayed in 8-bit pixelization. There's also no saving function in this game, so make sure you come to the right conclusions. This is a smaller, shorter indie game which doesn't require much time to complete, and on top of it being such a relatively little known game, that's all I really have on it, to be honest with you. You wake up and experience consciousness. Blurry memories flash by. Sensations. Pain. This is Citizen Sleeper. You are a robotic unit with the mind of a real human, owned by a megacorporation. In this world, AI has been outlawed, leading to companies skirting around this by having machines with a digitized version of a human consciousness, a sleeper. The point of view existing is to make a corporation money, a terrifying dystopian prospect with added body horror. You are inevitably used for indentured servitude until your unit escapes and eventually finds themselves on a gigantic space station called the Erlen's Eye. However, should a sleeper try to escape, their body will begin to break down and decay, as well as bounty hunters being sent to speed up the process. This is all sounding quite familiar so far. Regardless, you try and carve out a life for yourself on the space station. The game relies on a tabletop-style dice roll system that drives the mechanics of the gameplay. You are given 5 dice to roll at the beginning of each day or cycle, with varying numbers indicating positive, neutral, or negative actions based on those numbers. And these are used for various actions throughout the cycle, doing jobs, activities, etc. You also have to keep an eye on your condition and energy levels. But of course, things aren't that simple. The number of dice you are allocated on any given day is driven by the condition of your body or frame. Your condition decreases naturally as time progresses, but can also be driven down at an accelerated rate by things such as suffering an injury or rolling a negative dice roll. You can find fast ways to increase your condition, but they are available at an exorbitant price, for which you have to earn money, which means gambling with your condition further. And that's not even taking into account energy levels, which can increase the rate of your condition worsening, meaning you have to make sure you eat, which again costs money. And I know what you're thinking, this just sounds like real life. And it really does sound familiar. Personally, I have to do at least a couple of lines before these recording sessions to get me through. Reading out warm-up lines. On the face of it, this is reminiscent to Blade Runner, in all the obvious ways. The machine with a soul, escaping their creator, wanting to live their life, being hunted down. But on the more general cyberpunk front, this is more just depressingly like real life. You're brought into the world confused and you do the best with what you're given. You aren't completely in control of all of your circumstances, and you get into a loop where you work, then sleep, then work again. And it does remind me about how I would like to write and produce and make more videos, or any number of my other creative endeavors I enjoy, but it's often molded and skirted around the actual work that I have to do. And that might actually be what this game is trying to say, that the human psyche, even when transferred into the body of a machine, is still just limited to the confines of its surroundings. Picture this: dark stormy clouds above, a sea of distant city lights. A sudden burst of flames shoots out a giant metal pipe, and there are more, dotted around, dominating the landscape. Pillars of industry, standing like sentries on the open land. What would come to your mind when I describe this scene? The next game on our list is Norco. If Chinatown Detective Agency sparked my interest on first viewing, this game engulfed it in a ball of flame. Described as a southern gothic Blade Runner, this game truly does have an intangible about it. The first time I saw it, heard it, I got the sense there was something special here. Another point-and-click game released in 2022, set in the near future and in the real-life town of Norco, Louisiana. A far cry from the skyscraping cities of Los Angeles. Norco depicts an industrial hub surrounded by swamps and marshes. There are cyberpunk elements here, but it feels as though they're in the process of swallowing up the environment, as opposed to being already enveloped in it. A small town is being slowly digested by the corporations, sucking dry everything they once knew, extracting it into precious oil. Thankfully, I had this game on Game Pass and it was still available, so I began playing it last night as I'm writing this, and so far it's the wonderfully bizarre, enigmatic, atmospheric experience I thought it would be. Again, a game sporting a pixel art style. You find yourself not really remembering who you are or what's happened. All you do know is that you're back in your hometown, after the passing of your mother. Memories serve as a key factor in this game, as you navigate your mind map in an attempt to connect together the messy web of your past. In a feature that's very reminiscent of Disco Elysium in particular, it is suitably creepy and weird. Now I'm going to talk about Blade Runner 2049. In 2049, as pointed out in this great video by Just Right, the original Blade Runner clearly had many influences and anxieties which were reflected in the movie, one of which owing to the idea of pervasive advertisements, invading your personal space, seeping into every crack, attacking your eyes in a world where there is nowhere to shield them. These were emblematic of the worries people had for the future, and now we're in that future. We do face a version of this reality, adverts that know you and can appeal to you on a personal level based on your online activity. This is where, if I had one, I'd put an ironic VPN sponsorship right here. But just as Blade Runner addressed the future anxieties of the 1980s, 2049 addresses the future anxieties of the 2020s, a world battered by climate change and environmental destruction. A subject that is not only at the heart of Norco, but the essence of its very being. Norco in itself is an amalgamation of the experiences, memories and terrors of the game developer, who goes under the name of Yutz, who grew up in the real-life town of Norco. In an interview with The New Yorker, he describes how the area is essentially a cow, owned and milked by Shell for the sole purpose of oil. He reminisces about how he would sneak onto the manufacturing complex as a teenager, how explosions killed Shell workers, the shockwaves smashing their windows and covering their beds in glass. All of these aspects are experienced throughout the game, where a shady company called S.H.I.E.L.D. overtakes Norco with their petrochemical production. Oil refineries have made their appearance in Blade Runner and Cyberpunk 2077, and the idea of a gargantuan, morally questionable company like Shell rolling in and essentially taking over, causing the environment and its inhabitants to suffer, that is a very real dystopia. On the subject of cyberpunk and unchecked megacorporations, the fact that this game is seemingly based on such a real current situation in the world, and that's being told by someone who has actually experienced it, really adds to the whole experience of the game, as well as cynicism for the real world. But this game really does feel like a new, fresh genre. Comparisons to Blade Runner both a compliment and somewhat of a disservice. While it harnesses the spirit of the movie, it is definitely haunted by spirits of its own. The Ascent. When you're talking about Blade Runner-esque games and twin-stick shooters, one on top of the list would probably be The Ascent. Released in 2021 by Neon Giant, it was their first game, developed by just 12 people, taking place in Velez, a futuristic city with a massive tower structure owned by a mega corporation, of course. Called the Ascent Group, you were one of their indentured grunts, but when the group suddenly vanishes for no reason, the city turns into chaos with factions all vying for control in the resulting power vacuum. The world is, of course, suitably gritty, rainy, and neon-y, with areas packed with people living their lives in this dystopian cocoon. The combat is fast-paced and explosive, and as you progress higher up in the megastructure, you'll encounter new enemies and environments. This game is much more weighted on the action side in favour of story, but given the game's setting, the action very much is the story of this world. Obviously, you can make parallels of replicants and indentured servitude, especially when it comes to military application, but the Ascent is a beautifully actualized cyberpunk world, and has clearly drawn references from Blade Runner, which is almost impossible to not do when you're talking about cyberpunk. Our next game is Deus Ex. Officially released in 2015 after a successful Kickstarter fund, Deus Ex is a small studio side-scrolling game. I've included small indie games on these lists before, and it is always a bit more of a challenge to be honest, but at the same time, it really makes me realise how many games there are out there that people, individuals, pour their heart into and create literal worlds filled with life that don't even necessarily get the recognition or coverage their work deserves. This was made especially apparent upon researching this game and finding out that the lead designer, Jan Jurkowski, would pass away at the age of 26. In the game, you play as a lady called, guess who? Dex, who lives in a place called Harbor Prime, which is of course owned by... you get the idea. Across the game, you'll be able to traverse its two-dimensional environment and melee, shoot, hack, and platform your way through, becoming a part of the Resistance. There are also dialogue trees, story choices, and a range of side quests to be had. The art style from the game does stand out as it's quite different in both still frames and gameplay. It almost has a digital painting aesthetic to it, and this only adds to its uniqueness as a smaller title. The streets on Harbor Prime have a satisfying buzz to them, in a kind of dystopian way, with NPCs walking by you, in the foreground crowds in front of you, and a whole host of detailed sci-fi noir environments. There is something I find really commendable about all the detail in this game. During the shooting of the first Blade Runner movie, Ridley Scott was notoriously very particular about the sets and their details, and obviously on a smaller scale, this seems to be something that's observed in this game. Going back to my point at the beginning, it very much seems like a labour of love, and it would be nice if more people were able to get their eyes on it. The The birth of Cyberpunk is often attributed to two things. The first being Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which would of course go on to be adapted into Blade Runner, and the second being William Gibson's Neuromancer, both becoming the foundation of modern cyberpunk. VirtuaVerse is a point-and-click game set in a world reminiscent of Neuromancer. Now, I hear you, but seeing as I don't have a video games like Neuromancer series, I can put this here instead, but I think you'll come to the same conclusions I did. Displayed in a pixel art style, VirtuaVerse sees you taking control of Nathan, a hacker and user of the world's augmented virtual reality technology. You can stick a bit of Ready Player One in here too, I guess. Your girlfriend goes missing, and in your bid to find her you get stuck in a web that's part of a larger, world-threatening problem, involving making users of the VR technology permanently users of the product, never again experiencing the world outside them. This game features all the usual trimmings of a point-and-click game, collecting, talking, puzzles, and all that goodness. But of course we're here to talk about its aesthetic and theme. The look and soundtrack to this game mirror the 80s themed synthwave vibe movement that's become so prominent in recent years, with lots of purples and retro wave strings. It's another one to add to our list. Satellite Rain. The programmer for the original Syndicate Wars in 1996, Mike Diskett, had commented saying he had taken it upon himself to deliver what fans really wanted. So in 2015 we got Satellite Rain, an RTS game acting as a spiritual successor to the original Syndicate series, with the original game's composer even coming to the project and helping deliver what the game was. The story is also similar enough to the old guard, being set in a city where a corporation, Dracogenics, produces a technology used by people and have full control of the police force and the inner workings of the city. The player takes the role of someone working for a rival corporation, looking to take down Dracogenics, in a setting and story that sounds like it modified just enough from the original Syndicate series to still explore the same sentiments and gameplay. This seems like a feel-good story, with the original creator being able to take the old fanbase and make something in that same vein once more. Signalis. In what seems to be the unique combination of Resident Evil and Blade Runner, Signalis is described as a classic survival horror experience set in a dystopian future where humanity has uncovered a dark secret. Unravel a cosmic mystery, escape terrifying creatures, and scavenge an off-world government facility as Elster, a technician replica, searching for her lost dreams. You awaken as a replica, an android created with human neural imprints, essentially a machine with a soul. Similar to that of a replicant, or the sleeper units from Citizen Sleeper from the last episode. The replica units are used for, as you can imagine, warfare and labour. Your unit, known as Elster, sets about searching for their partner, Ariane. A game developed by a team of 2, it marries visuals of anime-style characters with the uncanniness of 90s video game graphics, with the 3-dimensional camera cuts included. Despite its sci-fi setting, its combat and tone have Resident Evil all over it. Fixed angle camera, optional tank controls, resource management, and save rooms. You'll encounter enemies in the game that are corrupted replicas, almost like the android equivalent to a zombie. They are the functional rotten corpses of these humanoid androids. If you couldn't tell already, this is much more along the horror side of things. On Elster's journey searching for her partner, she also experiences memories that aren't hers. Yes, it's our old friend, body horror, joined by our old friend, existential dread of being a machine with a consciousness. Of course, trying to go without spoiling any of the game's 4 multiple endings, this is a game about emotions deemed to be human, being expressed by a being who isn't. And in the end, what could be more Blade Runner than that? Tales from the Neon Sea. Aside from having a really cool name, in this aesthetically pleasing pixel art game, you'll take the role of Detective Rex, solving crimes, completing puzzles, and learning about your past. Living in a cyberpunk-themed city where humans and robots live together but don't exactly coexist, you'll traverse the stylized surroundings in a 2D platformer fashion, and at one point you can even play as a cat, which obviously makes it 10 out of 10. This is a fairly short game, and beyond the stereotypes of the hard-boiled alcoholic detective, this game's selling point really feels like its aesthetic. Neon Noir. I've covered some small games on this series before, but this game may be one of the smallest of the lot. Developed by Borzon Studios, Neon Noir is a visual novel where you play as a Snatcher, which is, funnily enough, the title of another Blade Runner-like from Kojima, documented in a previous episode, and you'll be investigating crimes in the futuristic metropolis of New Devon in 2169. The game's Steam page only has 3 reviews and a 1-minute trailer, and is listed as the first episode, so there could be the potential for more in the future, but that's pretty much all I have to go on. The art and the vibe look good, and most importantly, Blade Runner-y. Anno Mutationem, I think that's how it's pronounced. Released in 2022, this game combines the genre of Cyberpunk with the platforming of both 2D and 3D. You take the role of Anne Flores, a dangerous person navigating a neon-filled city, battling through hordes of enemies trying to uncover a mysterious past. The way the game combines 2D and 3D makes for a really interesting aesthetic, and you'll be able to interact with the NPCs inhabiting these spaces, as well as exploring some really beautiful, colourful environments, both on the ground and high above, to get a really good view of this world and its Blade Runner-like architecture. We've seen a lot of games that try to infuse the style of Cyberpunk with retro pixel art and adding in modern lighting for that extra kick, but I think this may be one of the most beautiful examples of such a thing. Rise of the Dragon. We're going all the way back to a game released in 1990, but set in the year 2053. You take the role of police officer turned detective William Blade Hunter. You can probably see where this is going. You're tasked with investigating the death of the mayor's daughter, which will lead you down a rabbit hole of a new designer drug, which mutates its users. Mostly being a puzzle-based point-and-click, it does also attempt some side-scroller shooting. This game is clearly and unashamedly influenced by Blade Runner. It's even set in Los Angeles, and the old pixel retro-futuristic nature of it lends it more to feeling like the aesthetic from the movie. It also has multiple endings, which in a way is like Blade Runner 2. Cloudpunk. In what looks like the result of a Blade Runner and LEGO crossover, in Cloudpunk you play as Rainer, a delivery driver who flies through the city of Nivalis, a metropolis which is located high above the ground, with the richer of society living higher up, of course, who transport cargo and passengers in work that's less than above board. The game showcases a rather unique, blocky aesthetic through a technique known as voxels. This led me down a bit of a rabbit hole, but apparently a voxel is like a pixel, except instead of being a square, it's a 3D cube, and in theory could potentially be the most realistic way of modelling. If you can get the voxels small enough, you could actually mimic subatomic particles, and yeah, this is way above my head. But they look cool in the game. Your character Rainer is a new arrival to the city, having fled her previous home after being pursued by Deck Corps. So it's kind of like if Deckard was a Door Dasher instead of a Blade Runner. Throughout the game, you'll be able to make decisions that influence the ending of the game, and even customize your vehicle and apartment. Much like Blade Runner, this is one of those vibes that just feels amazing, cozy even, despite its rather grim outlook. When I first got a look at Nobody Wants to Die, I knew that I would eventually play it. The few seconds I saw of it was enough for my brain to decide. I'm sure lots of fans of Blade Runner were thinking the same thing. It reminded me of that iconic scene in Deckard's apartment that's been seared into my brain for as many years. This idea of sitting on the edge of reality, on the precipice of a lethal dose of humanity, stealing a moment of calmness in the hell you find yourself surrounded by. This seems to be a very cyberpunk-coded thing, as so many titles of the genre have these moments, not just to showcase the paradoxic beauty of this horrifying world, but to impress upon us that despite living in impossibly tall apartment blocks, in cities so dense that they span not just horizontally, but vertically, you can still be solitary. In Nobody Wants to Die, the year is 2239 in New York City. Skyscrapers have now penetrated what remains of our atmosphere. We have the flying cars we've always been promised, and a medical breakthrough now allows humans to live without the restrictions of traditional lifespans, without disease, and without death itself. In this world, immortality has been achieved. It all sounds perfect, right? For the last 7 episodes in my Video Games Like Blade Runner series, I've scoured through countless sources looking to find all the video games that are, well, like Blade Runner. I've encountered games that I never knew existed and developed a newfound love of known ones. It's what I've cut my teeth on the early days of this channel, and as time's gone on, I veered away from doing videos where I just list a bunch of games, instead becoming more interested in the idea of diving deeper and completely submerging myself into ideas related to them and exploring all the streams that connect them. That's where this series and future videos will hopefully merge together. And for the first time in this series, I'll be dedicating an entire video to just one game. Taking the role of Detective James Kara, we maneuver a city that looks almost alien in its architecture. We aren't sure where one thing begins and another thing ends, what's up, what's down. I don't even know how that works. Despite the calendar year, this is a world in which the style is very much of days gone. The music, cars, costumes, even the laws are very much that of the American 1920s. It isn't exactly clear if this is a cycle of style going around once more, or that the world just hasn't moved on in the over 300 years after. When people don't die, when regimes don't change, when power structures are solidified, perhaps cultures stagnate as a result. After all, nobody wants to die. This juxtaposition between new and old is also present in Blade Runner. Not just because it was a movie made in the 1980s about 2019, but for as genre-changing and different as it was for the time, it too had its roots in the past. With its trench-coated gumshoe detectives, cigarette-smoking femme fatales, resembling something of a love child of the 1940s noir and a vision of the future. Whereas Deckard begins his journey as an ex-Blade Runner, being pulled out of retirement for another job, James Kara gets no such privilege, as we start off with him acclimatizing to his new body. In the world of Nobody Wants to Die, the human consciousness can be transferred from body to body. This is part of a mandatory insurance scheme that you're expected to pay off by the age of 21, or your body, known as a shell, gets repossessed, as these young, supple, impounded vessels are auctioned off to the highest bidder, and they use them as a spoiled rich kid with an unlimited supply of supercars would drive them, all while your mind is stored in a vault. It definitely has a similar premise to Altered Carbon. On previous episodes of video games like Blade Runner, I've commented on how many Cyberpunk games seem to emanate from Poland. 2077, Observer, Gamedec, Ghost Runner, Ruiner, it seems to almost be a speciality. And this game joins those ranks, being the first and so far only game developed by Wrocław-based Critical Hit Games. And it absolutely hits that balance between the Blade Runner vibes while carving out its own world and identity. As virtually every scene in Blade Runner is a feast for the eyes, the same can be said for Nobody Wants to Die. It's not an open world game, the locations are set pieces, and very much walled off and limited. You are absolutely on rails, but the view from your railed vehicle of choice is breathtaking. The first time you head into James Kara's apartment, we're greeted with rays of artificial light, made visible by fog, in a cluttered lived-in abode. And much like Deckard's iconic walk out onto the balcony to the tune of Blade Runner Blues, we're treated to our very own vibing while the world burns around us moment. I don't know what it is, but I just can't help but romanticize the idea of standing on a vantage point overlooking a game's world. And I attribute that to things like the balcony scene in Blade Runner. It's a kind of passive form of world building. I wanted to see more of this view, a desire I found myself fulfilling here. The idea of being able to just observe this space is nectar to me. One thing I'm also fascinated by is the details of the interior. When I worked on my doomed, never-to-be-released game, I studied the design of Deckard's apartment. I observed the wall tiles, the tiny cramped kitchen, and tried to replicate it. Seriously, if you search for Deckard tiles online, you can actually buy them. I'm not the crazy one, or if I am, these people are too. The tiles themselves were based on casts of the real-life location from the multi-million-dollar Ennis house located in Hollywood Hills. Both titles showcase a world with cassette futurism, tech that appears to be antiquated in its physical appearance, but with the inner workings of cutting-edge design, much like the contradicting relationship between the glamorized aesthetics of cyberpunk worlds and their brutal realities. These personal living spaces aren't immune from that. While it's implied that both Deckard and Kara's apartments are supposed to be these grungy bachelor pads, inhabited by broody alcoholics, they're actually kind of beautiful. Deckard living somewhere based on a designer house in Hollywood, and Kara having an apartment of this size in New York, feels like a microcosm of those bright, shiny cyberpunk worlds. You're telling me that a down-and-out wreck in a dystopian future, where corporations rule everything and the world is more overpopulated than ever, can still afford to rent a place in a city to yourself that's bigger than the entirety of my shared apartment? I'm recording this in a cupboard. Is our reality the real dystopia? But of course, it's not all glamour. Upon exploring James Kara's apartment, we do come across one of the most disturbing, under-the-radar story beats that I think I've ever come across in my time playing any game. One that absolutely crystallizes how awful the world that we are living in actually is, a point where human morality completely evaporates. There's a revolving communal bathroom, which you have to share with your neighbours by pressing a button to call it like an elevator, a truly haunting example of speculative fiction. Much like we get an intricate look at Deckard's personal effects, intimate items and tech of the time, we are greeted with a similar experience here. While the trinkets of the formula have led some to question if Deckard is himself a replicant, and if these are the items tethering him to his implanted past. As for Kara, he has items, photographs, of people from a former life. People who aren't dead, but are effectively completely different, with entirely new bodies. They wouldn't even recognize each other anymore. These are both stories about the limits of humanity and the embers of individualism and consciousness beyond it. I'd also like to find an excuse to talk about Adam Jensen's apartment from Deus Ex at some point, as it's definitely in the same vein of gruff cyberpunk pro-tags living in cool pads. Great name for a video. When sitting overlooking the city, we see tiny set pieces of the world, much like the miniatures giving us a glimpse at the Los Angeles of 2019. The distant assets of 2239 New York, while using different techniques, achieves the same thing. There are neon signs, flying cars, a blimp advertising things, a crowd of people the size of ants, moving along the streets, waiting to go and see an opera. At some point we find ourselves outside, lighting a cigarette, and rattling off some truly exemplary neo-noir detective lines.
This city has a disease, something festering deep down.
I went through this whole particular scene not really being sure what I was seeing. It was only at the end of the conversation when I realised how obvious what I was looking at was. We were lying down, looking up at the city. I think the confusion stemmed from New York in this world, effectively being as voluminous vertically as it is horizontally. The buildings and structures we see fading off into the distance while standing are practically the same ones as we see when looking up, or even down vertically. It never seems to end. It's like we're an insect in a nest. A city that isn't just land with structures built on top of it, but structures within structures, cocooned inside a steel cave, a system of cells, interlinked. The light we see at the top could be what's left of the atmosphere of this world, or it could just be yet another source of neon light seeping through. To all intents and purposes, it seems irrelevant. At the tail end of the game, we converge on what appears to be the remnants of Liberty Island, featuring a headless Lady Liberty. The place is a complete shantytown, with rickety makeshift antennas. Here we find Sarah, the woman we've been talking to on the radio throughout the game so far, who is sporting a body shell that is, if you are lacking in empathy, could describe as having seen better days, despite the fact that she is chronologically 29. Turns out that she is illegally renting her body out on the black market, while using a recycled body in order to afford to break out her partner, the one who purchased Sarah's body as a gift, out of the mind prison where wayward debtors are held. She also has little figurines to remind her of her past, as black market body swaps are more likely to result in memory degradation. She keeps them to try and remind her not to forget. Much like Kay's wooden horse or Rachel's spider web, in a world increasingly flooded by technological advancements, these memories act like an anchor, should you get lost in its waves. And in a reality when debt collectors aren't content with merely taking your possessions and home, and can break more than just your fingers and legs, they can commandeer your very soul. Later in the game, there are riots and civil unrest, after a law is proposed to lower the age of body repossession to 20 from 21. Much like a taxation that creeps up or new legislation that slowly burrows further into our lives. It's clear that the goal of this world is to hold as many people of this society indebted, having them pay a subscription, literally, just for existing. To have a populace working and paying taxes for eternity, to never allow them to die. Both Nobody Wants to Die and Blade Runner have a core theme that's not too dissimilar, exploring a point in which technology can be used to dehumanize on a mass scale. to a populace too run down to care or too powerless to do anything about it. If you can imagine such a world. When you live in a reality that has numbed you into apathy, to care about something, to go against the status quo, can mean the end of your life as you know it, but worth it all the same. Maybe that's the reason why we crave environments like this. I don't think it's just a coincidence that there is so often this recurring theme of sitting, standing, just observing the world, doing something that has no functional purpose, yet continues to manifest as a feeling across all of these experiences. In doing nothing, we're free to consider our relationship to the infinite possibilities beyond. It's like a moment of contemplation in a game when you're asked to pick between two world-changing events. Both will usually end up destroying you. The consistent message of film noir and cyberpunk in general is that there are no happy endings, but that doesn't have to mean the pursuit of happiness is futile.
It's too bad she won't live! But then again, who does?
Throughout the game, James Kara has several nightmarish visions. One where he is drowning, trying to swim to shore to reach his dead wife. Another where he is in the room of their deceased child. Everyone else he has ever loved is gone, while he is forced to remain. And in one of the multiple endings for the game, James drinks a poison which destroys the encoding process that allows his consciousness to be transferred, and ends up joining his wife on the shore of paradise. The irony in the title, Nobody Wants to Die, probably hasn't escaped you. The idea of having your consciousness locked up somewhere, not being allowed to truly perish, lies in stark contrast to Roy Batty's quest for more life, after his set 4 years, and raises the issue of quantity of life versus quality. The idea of living for yourself, even if that means being hunted, illness, purgatory, or even death itself. The aspect of creating, prolonging, altering, and neonifying our lives, all of that cyber stuff, is what attracted me to this genre for so long. But here I realised that so often in cyberpunk stories, the end seems to culminate with the burden being lifted from oneself. Escaping the tendrils that the world has wrapped around you.
Stop right where you are. You know the score, pal? You're not cop, you're little people.
During Batty's contemplative moment, his defiance is no longer displayed through violence, but by merely continuing to exist for the time that he has left. And I think that is pretty punk. As a series as we knew it, I think we can consider this the last of its kind, rather appropriately ending on Nobody Wants to Die, as I have loved this series and don't want it to die. But everybody does die, so it will in fact die. Even though I don't want it to, it will. Or will it? No, it really will. But don't worry, I still very much intend on basing every fibre of my being obsessing over Blade Runner and Cyberpunk. That'll never leave me. So, hope you continue sticking around.